The third day on Keth Dora started early because nobody had slept particularly well, and started with purpose because there was no other option. The extraction beacon was still 11 kilometers out. Not an impossible distance, not even a difficult one under normal conditions. But Yaba's ankle was stiff in the morning cold and would need to be managed. The communicator was still producing fragmented signals and had not reached Fleet Command. And the jungle outside the survey station ruins had spent the entire night full of that slow, patient hum. The Vreth were still there. Dara knew it before she even looked. She had slept in short cycles, and each time she came back to full wakefulness, she had done a slow, quiet scan of the shelter perimeter without moving her body, and every time, somewhere in the dark between the trees, there had been the faint glow of pale eyes, sitting very still. They were not hunting. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Thing they had been doing since the first night. Watching, measuring, waiting to see what the group did next. Dara had a theory about the Vreth that she had been building for 2 days now, and the theory was this. They were not simply predators. They were tests. The jungle itself, testing every creature that passed through it, sorting the ones that froze from the ones that didn't. And the ones that kept passing the tests were allowed to continue passing through. It was a theory she could not prove, but it was a theory she intended to act on. She woke the team as the first gray light came through the vine canopy above, distributed the last of the shared rations quickly and quietly, checked Yava's ankle, swollen but functional, wrapped it tight, and told Yava to say something the moment it became a real problem rather than a manageable one. And then she looked at Reth. "Your plan got us to the canyon, and the canyon was a problem," she said, without accusation. "Just clearly. My read of these creatures says they do not lay the same trap twice. They learn. So the canyon will probably be safe now. But I want you to plan today's route with that assumption, and I want to know what you see." Reth looked at her for a moment. Then he opened his tablet and started working, and when he showed her the route 12 minutes later, it was faster than anything he had planned before. Using the canyon crossing after all, and it had 3 specific fallback points built into it, at positions where the terrain naturally provided cover and high ground. Not the route of someone who was optimizing for speed, but the route of someone who was thinking about what could go wrong and planning for it before it happened. It was, in Dara's honest assessment, an excellent plan. "Good," she said. "Let us move." The canyon was empty when they reached it, not just clear on the scanner, actually, genuinely completely empty, in a way that felt different from the previous day's false reading. A bioluminescent light on the far wall pulsed slowly. The crossing was open, and the tree line on both sides was still in the way that meant nothing large was immediately nearby. They crossed in under 3 minutes, no incidents, no sounds. On the other side, Mole exhaled once through his nose, in a way that might, from a thorac, have been the equivalent of a long, relieved breath. They were 2 hours into the final leg when the second encounter happened. It came from above, rather than from the sides. A single Vreth, younger than the one from the canyon, by the look of its smaller body and slightly brighter exoskeleton, dropping from the canopy onto a thick branch roughly 8 meters ahead and blocking the trail with its full body weight. Mandibles running at that resonant frequency. Pale eyes fixed on the group. Everyone stopped, and then Yava spoke. "It is nervous," she said. Her voice was quiet and careful, but it was steady. "Watching the way they move since yesterday. The adults move like water, smooth and deliberate. This one is moving like it is waiting for a response, like it is asking a question. It dropped in front of us, not on us." "What does that mean?" Sisoran asked. "I think it means this is a younger one, and it is doing what the older ones did with us on the first night, announcing itself, testing, seeing what we do," Yava said. Dara looked at her with something that was very close to pride. "Then we answer the same way," Dara said. And she stepped forward, planted her feet, and held eye contact with the young Vreth. And from somewhere in her chest she produced a sound. Lower this time, less a shout and more a long, steady growl, the sound of something that is completely present and completely unafraid and completely committed to standing its ground. The young Vreth held position for several long seconds. Then it stepped off the branch, dropped to the jungle floor, and walked off the trail to the left, disappearing into the ferns without looking back. Maul made a sound. It took everyone a moment to realize that the sound was a laugh. Quiet, controlled, unmistakably genuine. The first time any of them had ever heard the old Thurak warrior produce one outside of a story about a fight he had already won. "I see it now," he said, to no one in particular. "I finally see it." They reached the extraction beacon with 47 minutes to spare before the 72-hour mark. The signal went up clean and strong, Fleet Command acknowledged within seconds, and the pickup shuttle broke cloud cover 11 minutes later, coming in low over the canopy in a wide banking arc that scattered the jungle birds and sent the spores swirling up in bright, spinning clouds. When they climbed aboard, the Academy liaison officer waiting inside the shuttle, a young Vethalai lieutenant with the pressed uniform and slightly too perfect posture of someone who had never done a field trial himself, looked at the team, and then specifically at the mission logs Sis Orin had been maintaining throughout, and his expression moved through several stages before settling on something that had no clean name. The debrief was 3 days later in the Academy's main hall. The hall was used for formal ceremonies and important announcements, and it seated at full capacity around 800 cadets from across the Union's member species. And it was at full capacity today because word had traveled the way word always traveled, in a place where 800 young soldiers from a dozen worlds lived and ate and trained together in close quarters, fast and with considerable embellishment. The senior council sat at the long table at the front, 12 senior officers representing the major species of the Union, in full dress uniform, with the mission log footage from the 5-cadet team queued up on display screens that ran along the hall's upper walls. They played the canyon footage first, the moment of the Vreth ambush, the freeze, and then Dara's single step forward. And in the hall, there was a silence of the particular kind that only happens when 800 people all have the same reaction at the same moment, and none of them know exactly what to do with it. Then they played the audio from the campfire, the conversation about Earth, about prey animals that stopped running, about fear converted into fuel. And the silence in the hall deepened into something that had more weight to it, something that pressed against the chest slightly, the way that low hum had pressed against the chest in the jungle. The Thurak Admiral, at the center of the council table, sat forward in his chair. His decorations ran from collar to waist, and his eyes, dark and very old, had the look of someone who had outlived most of the people he respected, and was not easily moved anymore. And he asked, in a voice that carried perfectly to every corner of the hall without being raised, "Cadet Voss, when you stepped toward the Predator, were you not afraid?" Dara stood at the front of the hall, not quite at attention, not quite at ease, the posture of someone who is thinking honestly about a question instead of performing a posture. "Yes, sir," she said. "I was afraid, but on my world, fear and action are not the same thing. They never have been. And the part of my brain that makes that distinction is not something I learned at this academy. It is something my species earned over a very long time of being something smaller than the thing trying to eat it." The Admiral looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the full hall. "This cycle," he said, "the Union Defense Academy formally recommends Cadet Dara Voss for the Vanguard Officer track. Her mission record will be added to the Xenopsychology curriculum as a primary case study, not as an example of physical superiority, as an example of a specific quality that the Union has not, until now, had a clinical name for." He paused. "We are naming it human persistence," he said, the demonstrated capacity to interpret extreme fear as a reason to advance rather than a reason to retreat. This quality is not listed in any existing Union military framework. It will be now. The hall was quiet, and then Reth, sitting in the front row with his tablet on his knee and his back perfectly straight, raised one long silver hand and began to tap it against his other palm in the Vithali formal gesture of deep respect. A gesture that his species gave rarely and meant completely. Mull did the same, his scarred hands coming together in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Yava followed, then Sisorin, then the cadets in the row behind them, then the row behind that. It spread across the hall, the way the silence had spread through the jungle, in a wave, rolling outward from a center, until 800 beings from 100 different worlds were making whatever sound their species made for this particular feeling, and the hall was full of it, and it was not quiet anymore. Dara stood at the front and kept her face still and her shoulders straight and her eyes clear. Later, walking alone down the long corridor outside the hall, she stopped at the observation window and looked out at the stars, the same stars she had looked at before the drop, cold and countless and indifferent as ever. She thought about New Reykjavik, gray rock, gray sea, wind off the ocean in long, hard sheets. She thought about what her father used to say when the storms came in, and the fishing boats had to stay in port, and the whole colony seemed to pull its collar up against the weather and wait. He would stand at the window and watch the waves, and say without drama, as if it were just a fact about weather, "Hard before it stops." That is how storms work. You stay on your feet until it does. They found another crossing 2 kilometers south, a natural rock bridge, narrow but solid, wide enough for one body at a time, and they crossed it without incident, which was not the same thing as crossing it without fear. Every single step across that bridge, every one of them was watching the tree line on both sides, and the tree line on both sides was, in its own quiet way, watching back. There was that low hum again, distant but present, a reminder that something knew exactly where they were, and had decided, for reasons of its own, to let them pass. When they reached the far side, nobody celebrated. They just walked faster. Reth had recalculated the route twice since the canyon. The second route, the one he was currently running them on, was longer by roughly 4 hours, but kept them close to elevated ground rather than open crossings. And he had made this change without anyone asking him to, which told Dara more about how shaken he was than anything else could have said out loud. By the time the moon's light began to angle low and orange through the canopy, it was clear they were not going to reach the extraction beacon before nightfall. The terrain had been harder than the map suggested. The rerouting had cost them time, and Yava had turned an ankle on a hidden route gap, slowing the whole group's pace for the last 2 hours. Mull found them shelter without being asked. The ruins of an old survey station, half swallowed by the jungle, wall still mostly standing, roof gone, but replaced by a dense tangle of vines that blocked the sky reasonably well. It was dry. It had 3 solid walls to put their backs against, and it sat on a slightly raised piece of ground that gave them a clear view of the approaches. It was a good defensive position. Mull always found good defensive positions. Even when his hands were steady now, even when his voice was back to its usual deep, even tone, there was something in the way he kept glancing at the jungle beyond the broken walls that had not been there yesterday. Dara got the fire going. This produced an immediate and interesting reaction. Reth took 2 steps back from it instinctively, his expression one of genuine discomfort, because the Vithali considered open combustion primitive in a way that went past practical objection and into something almost aesthetic. Fire was what you had before you had better options, and the idea of choosing it voluntarily sat badly with him. "It produces unnecessary light signature," he said. "It also produces heat, which the Vreth, that is what I am calling them, do not like, and morale which all of us need right now, Dara said, as she fed another piece of dry wood into the small, steady flame without looking up at him. Reth did not argue. He sat down on the far side of it, as far from the flames as he could reasonably get, while still being inside the shelter, and wrapped his arms around his own knees in a way that made him look, briefly, much younger than he was. Dara moved around the group quietly. She redistributed the rations without making it a production, making sure Yava got the highest calorie pack, because the Qatari burned energy fast, and the ankle injury was going to cost her. She cleaned and bound Mul's arm, where a sharp piece of root had cut him during the canyon retreat, quick and efficient, using supplies from her own kit. She sat beside Sisoran for a few minutes, while the Saurine ran diagnostics on the damaged communicator, not helping, because she did not know Saurine communication equipment well enough to help, but just being present, which seemed to matter. Yava watched all of this from her corner of the shelter, and eventually said, in her soft, precise voice, "You are doing the thing, the human thing, where you take care of the group." "Someone has to," Dara said. "On my world," Yava said, "when a team suffers a shock like the canyon, we separate and we recover alone. Contact feels like pressure after a fear event. You do the opposite." "On my world," Dara said, "alone after a fear event is where things go wrong. Humans are not good on their own after something scary. We need to hear other voices. We need to know the group is still there. It is probably not the right call for everyone. I'm sorry if I pushed too close." "No," Yava said, after a pause. Mul was the one who asked the question. He waited until the fire had settled into a steady low burn, and the jungle outside had reached its nighttime volume, and everyone had eaten. And then he asked it the way he did most things, directly and without decoration. "Where did you learn what you did at the canyon? The sound, the stillness, the forward step? No union protocol covers that behavior. I have read every manual this academy issues, and nothing in any of them says, 'Step toward the predator.'" Dara thought for a moment about how to answer that. "It is not in the manuals," she said, "because it is not something we learned in training. It is something we are, all of us, every human being who has ever lived. It comes from a very long time ago." She looked at the fire and organized her words. "Humans did not start at the top," she said. "That is the thing that I think people in the Union do not really understand about us. With our ships and our weapons and our seats at the diplomatic table, and you think, new species, small, not very impressive, but you do not look at where we came from." She picked up a stick and turned it slowly in her fingers. "We came from a planet with things on it that were bigger than us, faster than us, stronger than us, with better teeth and better claws and better senses. And for a very long time, we were not the hunters, we were the hunted. We lived in groups, and we watched the dark, and we ran when we had to, and we hid when we could. But something happened," she continued, "something in the brain, a long time ago. Scientists call it a kind of switch, and humans stopped just running from the things that frightened them. They started turning around. They started picking up rocks and bones and sharpened sticks. They started hunting the things that had been hunting them, not because they had become physically capable of winning those fights, but because the brain had found a way to do something very strange with fear." "What did it do with fear?" Yava asked. "It converted it," Dara said. "It took the fear signal, that full-body alarm, the fast heartbeat, the wide eyes, the flooded muscles, and it turned it into something else. Not calm exactly, but focused, directed. The fear became fuel. And sometimes, when the conversion was complete, when the brain had fully committed to the forward decision, the fear became something that actually felt almost like excitement, almost like readiness, almost like laughter." The fire popped quietly. "When I stepped toward the Vreth," Dara said, "I was afraid. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely afraid. But the fear did not produce the response it was supposed to produce. It did not make me small or still or slow. It made me loud and present and forward, because my brain is built, after a very long time of being prey, to interpret that level of fear as a signal that something important is happening and that the body should rise to it. The laugh, Maul said. The laugh is the top of it, Dara said. The laugh is the brain saying, you looked at the worst thing you could see, and you are still here, and that is so improbable, and so defiant that it is almost funny. Not in a losing your mind way, in a the universe threw its best at you, and you are still on your feet way. She looked up from the fire. The Vreth had never seen a prey animal laugh at it, she said. That is why it stopped. Not because I was stronger than it, or smarter than it. Because I did not do what every other piece of prey on this moon had ever done, and it did not have a response prepared for something that laughed. Reth had been listening in absolute silence from his place across the fire, and now he said something in a voice that was very careful. The voice of someone who was reassessing a very large number of things at the same time. The Union Council reviewed humanity's application for membership 3 separate times. The vote was close each time. The primary concern raised was aggression, unpredictability, the worry that humans were too dangerous to bring inside the structure. I know, Dara said. I believed that concern was valid, Reth said. I want to be honest with you about that. I thought the council was right to be cautious. And now? Dara asked. Reth took a long moment. Now I think, he said slowly, that the council was afraid of the right species, but afraid for entirely the wrong reason. Dara looked at him across the fire. Then she smiled, not a sharp smile, not a proud one, just a quiet, tired, real one. Get some sleep, she said. We have a long walk tomorrow. And the fire burned low and steady in the dark of Keth Dora. And outside the broken walls of the old survey station, the jungle hummed its deep, slow hum, and the pale eyes of the Vreth moved at the edge of the trees, and then moved away. And inside the shelter, 5 very different beings from 5 very different worlds sat together in the small warmth that one human had made from dead wood and sparks. And something between them that had not existed at the start of the day was quietly, stubbornly beginning to grow. Dara said nothing about what she had seen during the night watch. She almost did. She stood up when Maul came to take the morning shift, opened her mouth, and then looked at the team slowly waking up around her. Reth reviewing his route plan, Yava stretching her small limbs, Sisoran running her scanner diagnostics with quick, efficient clicks. And she made a decision. They needed to move, not freeze, and right now, detailed information about intelligent predators moving in coordinated patterns around the camp would produce freezing, not movement. So she filed the observation in her head, kept her eyes open, and fell into line when Reth called the team together and laid out the plan for the day. The fastest route to the extraction beacon requires crossing a canyon approximately 3 kilometers ahead, Reth said, his long silver fingers tracing the route on his tablet's projected map. The canyon is shallow, the crossing is open ground, no cover. Exposed distance is manageable. 4 minutes at a steady walk. Statistically, the risk is acceptable, given the time we save by not routing around. Dara looked at the map. The canyon was exactly the kind of terrain that made sense to a mind like Reth's. Open, measurable, predictable. The kind of space where variables could be calculated and controlled. It was, from a pure navigation standpoint, an excellent choice. It was also, from the perspective of something that had spent the night studying how her team moved, a perfect killing ground. She opened her mouth again, and again she stopped. Because she had one night's observation and a feeling, and Reth had data and a plan. And in this team, right now, feelings did not outrank data. Understood, she said. I will take rear. They moved out through the morning jungle, which was cooler than the day before, but heavier with mist. The bioluminescent plants were dimmer in the dawn light, drifting through the air, had a slightly different color, a deeper green that made the jungle feel less like a wonder and more like the inside of something alive. Maul was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was the stillness of a veteran who had learned to conserve everything, including attention. This quiet was the stillness of something listening very hard and not liking what it heard. Dara stayed close to the rear and watched the tree line. The sounds were there, that low, resonant hum, just under the noise of the jungle, coming from the left and the right, and both at once. And twice she saw movement in the upper canopy that was too large and too deliberate to be wind. She noted it, said nothing, kept walking. The canyon opened up ahead of them without much warning, the dense jungle simply ending at a sharp edge and dropping away into a wide, shallow cut in the moon's rock, maybe 20 meters deep and 100 meters across. The far side was clear jungle, and somewhere beyond it, the extraction beacon was transmitting its steady pulse. Reth stopped at the edge and ran his scan. No significant fauna signatures on the crossing. Wind is manageable. I recommend we cross now. Single file, steady pace, no reason to hesitate. Mo looked left along the canyon wall, then right, then at the far tree line for a long time. Something is wrong, he said flatly. The scan is clear, Reth said. The scan was clear last night, when they were walking 30 meters from us, Dara said, and then stopped because she had not meant to say that out loud, and now every head in the team was turned toward her. Explain, Maul said. I saw 3 of them last night during my watch. At the edge of the clearing, they stood and looked at the camp, and then left. I did not want to cause a panic before we had daylight and a plan. I am sorry, I should have told you immediately. That followed was the kind that has weight. Reth looked at her with an expression that she could not fully read, but that contained, somewhere in it, something she had not seen on his face before. Something that might have been the very beginning of fear. They watched us, Mole said slowly, and then they watched us walk this direction all morning, and this is the only crossing point for 2 kilometers in either direction. And then the jungle on the far side of the canyon moved, not the wind, not the mist, not a random creature bolting from cover. A coordinated eruption of motion from 3 separate points, left, right, and center. 8-legged bodies flowing over the canyon rim with a fluid, terrible speed. Mandibles producing that resonant hum, now at full volume, a sound that hit the chest like a physical force. And the team broke. Not physically, nobody ran, but they shattered internally, all at once, in ways specific to what each of them. Reth's mind, built for logic and calculation, tried to process a predator that had laid a trap and simply could not complete the equation. His hands dropped to his sides, and his eyes went wide and blank. Sisoran's deep hive instinct, the instinct that said collective threat requires collective response, and wait for the signal from the whole, screamed at her to freeze and wait for a swarm that was never going to come. She locked solid on the spot. Yava made a sound that was not a word and curled in on herself. Cathari defensive reflex, pulling her limbs close and making herself small. Even Mo, who had 3 wars in his body, Mo with the scarred forearms and the 1,000-yard stare, stumbled backward 1 step, drew his sidearm with a hand that was not steady, and pointed it at the lead creature with the expression of someone who had finally found the thing that scared him. Before the echo had even finished, she laughed. Not a panicked laugh, not the high broken sound of someone coming apart, a real laugh, short and sharp and genuine, the laugh of someone who had just seen something ridiculous and found it funny, the laugh of someone who had decided, clearly and firmly, that this situation did not get to frighten her. The lead creature stopped. It was the largest of the 3. Its body alone was the size of a heavy ground vehicle. And it had been hunting on Keth Dora for over 40 years, and in all of those 40 years of hunting, prey had never, not once, stepped toward it. It stood completely still and looked at Dara with its many pale eyes, and its mandibles stilled. Dara looked back at it without blinking, and started talking. Low, steady, almost conversational. Not because she thought it understood words, but because the sound mattered. The constant human sound, calm and present and utterly without the high frequency. Notes of fear that every predator on every planet learned to hear and follow. Reth, she said, in the same low, even tone, you are going to move. Left side of the canyon rim, single file, slow, do not run, do not make sudden movements, go now. She heard Reth moving. Mull, help Yava, stay with the group. Left side, moving. She heard them moving. Sis Oren, you are fine, you are moving now, left side. The whole time she talked to her team, she kept her eyes on the lead creature, and kept her body still and forward-facing, and kept her voice producing that steady stream of sound. And when the team had cleared their position, she began walking backward, slow measured steps, still facing the creature, still talking, still completely calm. The creature did not follow. It watched her go with those pale lantern eyes, and it did not move, and the other two stayed where they were. And when Dara's back finally reached the jungle cover of the end canyon rim, she allowed herself one single breath that was slightly larger than the rest. When she turned around, Reth was looking at her. Mull was looking at her. Yava had uncurled and was looking at her. Even Sis Oren had stopped scanning and was looking at her. Reth's voice, when it came, was genuinely stripped of its usual confidence. Not rude, not academic, not precise, just honest and a little shaken. What are you? Dara checked her bootlace. It had come loose in the mud, and she tied it back without hurrying. Tired, mostly, she said. We need to find another crossing. Let us keep moving. The drop pods hit the atmosphere of Keth Dora just after the moon's long sunrise, and the first thing Dara noticed when her pod cracked open and the hatch swung down was the heat. It was not the dry heat of a desert or the clean heat of a summer afternoon. It was thick and wet and heavy, the kind of heat that pressed against the skin and made every breath feel like drinking warm water, the kind that turned a simple walk into something the body had to work for. The jungle around her landing site was enormous. Trees that rose 50 meters straight up before they even thought about branching out, with trunks wider than cargo containers, and root systems that burst up through the soft ground in tangled arches tall enough to walk under. The canopy above was so dense that only thin scattered shafts of pale gold light made it down to the jungle floor, and those shafts were full of slow-drifting spores that caught the light and made the air look like it was full of faint green smoke. Everything glowed slightly. That was the bioluminescence the briefing had mentioned. The bark of the trees had faint blue-white pulses running up and down it like slow heartbeats. The ground-level plants had leaves edged in soft orange. And somewhere deeper in the jungle, something was producing a low, steady light that was the color of old copper, just visible between the trunks. It was, Dara thought, one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen in her life. And also, immediately, obviously, a place that wanted to kill her. She checked her gear, confirmed her communicator was online, and moved to the rally point. The team came together inside 4 minutes, a good sign. Reth arrived first, because Reth always arrived first, already consulting the terrain map on his tablet, with the focused expression of someone who found comfort in data. Sis Oren came in from the east, her insectoid frame moving with the quick, careful precision of a creature built for efficiency rather than speed. Yava dropped almost silently from a low branch overhead, her small Cathari body barely making a sound when she landed. She had clearly climbed her way here rather than walked, which given the root-tangled ground made perfect sense. And Mull walked in from the north, slow and deliberate, scanning the tree line as he moved rather than looking at the team, his hand near, but not on his sidearm. Team assembled, Reth said, not as a greeting, but as a data point. Route to extraction beacon confirmed. Estimated travel time at standard pace, 18 hours. I recommend we begin immediately and cover maximum ground before the first night cycle. Nobody argued with that. Reth's plans were as a rule very good. They moved out single file, with Mull taking the front, because the Thurak had more real jungle experience than the rest of them combined. Reth and Sisoran in the middle, running navigation and communications respectively. Yava just behind them, using her spatial memory to track their exact position against the map without needing to look at a device, and Dara at the rear. Rear guard was the least glamorous position. It meant watching the back trail, dealing with whatever came from behind. It was the position usually given to the least trusted or least experienced member of a team. And Dara knew that was exactly why she had been placed there. She took the position without comment and did her job well. The first 4 hours were genuinely manageable. The terrain was difficult but predictable. The team moved efficiently. Mole found a shallow river crossing that saved them nearly 2 hours of going around. And the local fauna they encountered was exactly what the briefing had described. Large but not aggressive, mostly interested in leaving the group alone. Yava called out a turn twice before the navigation system updated to confirm it. Both times she was right, and both times Reth noted the correction with the slightly stiff expression of someone who respected accuracy but did not enjoy being beaten to it. Dara watched everything. She watched the trees, not just the ones ahead, but the ones to the sides and behind. The ones where the bioluminescence pulsed differently. The ones where the spore patterns in the air had been disturbed. The ones where bird-like creatures had gone quiet in a spreading circle. The way silence moved through a jungle like a wave rolling away from something that did not belong. She watched the ground, the soft places where something heavy had pressed recently, the scratched bark at mid-height on the wider trunks, the places where the root systems had been worn smooth by repeated passage of large bodies. She did not say anything yet, because what she was seeing could have been anything, could have been normal for this moon, could have been nothing worth mentioning. But she started paying closer attention. It was Mull who first said something, and he said it quietly. Not a warning, not an alarm, just a simple flat statement delivered in the careful voice of someone who was choosing their words with precision. Something has been moving. Parallel to us for the last 40 minutes. Everyone stopped. I have not seen it, he continued. I have seen what it leaves. Pressure marks, disturbed air, a smell that has no entry in my field catalog. Whatever it is large, and it is not afraid of us. Sisoran's scanner came up immediately, sweeping the trees in a tight arc. She frowned at the readings in a way that made her mandibles click once, and said, "Signal is fragmented. It bounces. It seems to come from 3 directions at once. I cannot get a clean reading." That does not happen with normal fauna, Reth said, and for the first time since the drop, his voice had lost its steady academic confidence. Not much, just enough for someone who was paying attention to hear it. Dara was paying attention. Keep moving, Mull said. We make camp before dark. We post watches. We do not bunch together. They made camp in a clearing near a cluster of large root arches that provided natural cover on 3 sides. It was a good defensive position, the kind Mull would have chosen even without a potential threat. And the fact that he had specifically picked it now was not lost on anyone. The night sounds of Keth Dora were layered and constant. Clicks and low calls, and the slow rhythmic creaking of the giant trees settling in the cooling air. But underneath all of it, there was something else. A sound that was not quite a hum, and not quite a vibration. Something felt as much as heard. Something that seemed to come from the ground and the canopy at the same time, as if whatever was making it was very large, or there were many of them, or both. The team took watches in rotation. Dara took the last one, the cold gray hour before the moon's long dawn, because she always took the hardest watch, and because she was honest enough with herself to admit that she slept lightly on unknown ground, and might as well be useful with it. Trying to, when she saw them for the first time. They came out of the tree line slowly, 8 legs moving in a low, flowing motion that made almost no sound for creatures of their size. Black exoskeletons that did not reflect the bioluminescent light, but seemed to pull it in and swallow it. 4 sets of mandibles that produced, even at rest, that low, resonant hum she had been hearing for hours. Eyes that were pale and many, and that caught the faint light in a way that made them glow like dim lanterns. There were 3 of them. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, not charging, not retreating, just standing there in the dark, looking directly at the camp with those pale, burning eyes. Dara did not move. She held herself completely still and looked back at them, and while she looked, she thought very clearly and carefully about what she was seeing. Not prey behavior, not a random encounter, not a feeding run. This was deliberate. This was a patrol. This was a communication. We know you are here. We are letting you know we know, and we are watching to see what you do next. After a long time, maybe 4 minutes, maybe 5, the 3 creatures turned and moved back into the trees without a sound. Dara reached for her field log and wrote 1 line. They wanted us to see them. Prey animals do not announce themselves. I do not think we are. She closed the log, kept her eyes on the tree line, and sat with that thought until the dawn came slow and pale through the canopy above. The Interstellar Union Defense Academy floated in the cold dark of space, sitting in a high orbit around a giant swirling gas planet called Verath 9. And it was the most respected military school in the entire known galaxy. Every species that had ever built a ship and reached the stars wanted their best and brightest young soldiers trained inside its walls. The Vithali sent their sharpest minds, the Saurine sent their most disciplined warriors, and the ancient Thurak sent only those who had already survived decades of real combat before ever setting foot in a classroom. The academy was enormous, a structure so large that it had its own weather systems in the inner agricultural rings, its own transit lines running between the dormitory towers, and a central parade ground so wide that standing at one end meant the other end was lost in a faint mist. It was, by any measure, a place of greatness. And somewhere in the middle of it all, eating alone, at the far end of a long metal bench in the lower mess hall, sat Corporal Dara Voss, 22 years old, from a cold and windy colony planet called New Reykjavik, and the only human being in the entire academy. She had a tray of warm food in front of her, a battered paperback book of old Earth War poetry propped against her water canteen, and absolutely no interest in the whispers happening at the tables around her. She could hear them anyway. The Vethali cadets, tall and silver-skinned, with long fingers that moved constantly when they talked, kept their voices low, but their language was one Dara had studied, and she caught the words they used for her species without much trouble. Biochemically unstable, emotionally erratic, statistically improbable that they survive long enough to be useful. The Saurine, who moved in tight clusters, even when there was plenty of room to spread out, communicated in a layered series of clicks and hums that Dara could not fully translate. But the way their large compound eyes tracked her whenever she walked through a room told her everything she needed to know about their opinion of her. Even the Thurak, the oldest and most battle-worn species in the Union, beings who had been crossing the stars before humanity had invented writing, simply looked through her as if she were a smudge on a window that was not worth cleaning. Humanity had only had faster-than-light travel for 60 years. 60 years, in a galaxy where some civilizations had been traveling between stars for 10,000. So yes, the Academy had accepted 1 human cadet, and yes, it was probably a diplomatic gesture, a polite nod to the new species that had stumbled into the galactic community with loud voices and an embarrassing amount of enthusiasm. Dara knew this. She had known it before she ever boarded the transport that brought her here. It did not slow her down, even slightly. Physical training track. Not because she was the fastest. The soaring cadet named Cisarin could outpace her easily on a flat sprint. But because she started earlier than anyone else, and she finished after everyone had already left. In the combat simulation room, she was not the strongest. Mull, the old Thuric cadet, with scars running up both forearms, could bench press equipment that would flatten a human being. But she lost fewer simulation rounds than almost anyone in her cohort, because she did not panic when things went wrong, and things in combat simulations went wrong constantly. In the strategy and navigation classes, the Vethali cadet named Reth, precise, cold, almost always correct, outscored her on the written assessments every single time, and she did not argue with that, because Reth was genuinely brilliant, and Dara knew the difference between losing to someone better and losing because she had not tried hard enough. She tried hard enough. Always tried hard enough. At night, when the lights in the dormitory towers dimmed, and the other cadets went through their various resting rituals, the Soreen clustering together in their corner of the shared quarters, the Vethali doing their long meditative breathing exercises, Mull sitting perfectly still in the dark in a way that was either deep sleep or something else entirely. Dara read her poetry and thought about home. New Reykjavik was a cold planet, full of gray rock and gray sea, and wind that came off the ocean in long, hard sheets. It was not a beautiful place by most measures, but it was a tough one. And the people who lived there were tough the same way the rock was tough. Not because anything had made them that way on purpose, but because the soft parts had been worn away a long time ago, and what was left did not bend. Her father had been a fisherman, and her mother had run the colony's small medical station, and neither of them had ever left the planet's atmosphere. But both of them had told her, in different ways and at different times, the same thing. The galaxy does not care how small you are. You show it what you are made of, and you do not wait for permission. She had not waited for permission. The Academy announcement came on a gray Tuesday morning over the public address system. A calm, even voice in the universal trade language explaining that the final trial of the current training cycle had been scheduled, and that all cadets would be dropped onto the surface of a moon called Keth Dora for a survival and leadership exercise lasting 72 hours. The briefing document sent to their personal data tablets described Keth Dora as a Tier 4 hostile environment, dense jungle, bioluminescent plant life, unpredictable weather patterns, rough terrain, and local fauna that was classified as moderately dangerous. Cadets would be dropped in mixed teams of 5, with basic survival gear and a single communicator per team. The goal was to reach an extraction beacon placed deep in the jungle interior and signal for pickup before the 72 hours expired. It sounded difficult. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing the Academy was built to prepare them for. Around her in the briefing hall, Dara could see her fellow cadets absorbing the information in their different ways. Reth was already mapping the terrain data on a secondary tablet, building a route plan with quick, precise gestures. Cisarin was running communication frequencies through a small handheld scanner. Mull sat with his arms crossed, and his old scarred face completely unreadable. What none of them knew, what the briefing document did not mention, because the officers who wrote it had assumed that no cadet team would ever push far enough into the interior for it to matter, was what actually lived in the deep dark of Keth Dora's jungle. The Academy had classified that information under a flag that meant not relevant to standard training scenarios. It was about to become very relevant. Dara closed her data tablet, tucked it under her arm, and walked out of the briefing hall into the wide corridor beyond. And for just a moment she stopped and looked out through the long observation window at the stars outside, cold and countless and completely indifferent. Then she rolled her neck, picked up her pace, and went to start packing her gear.